Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday. On October 2nd, 2008, a small budget documentary film called More Than a Game made its limited release debut across American theaters. The film chronicled its star, LeBron James, as he navigated the absolute insanity of his high school playing days, where he and his teammates, who were also documented, won 3 state championships at St. Vincent St. Mary's High School in Akron, Ohio. The film was a milestone for American sports and its athletes, even though it grossed less than $1 million at the box office. For one, it cemented the status of LeBron James, then not even 25 years old, as basketball's biggest superstar. It wasn't Tim Duncan, it wasn't Kobe Bryant, it wasn't Shaquille O'Neal. Even though those men had more championships, MVPs, and total stats than LeBron at the time, that wasn't what mattered anymore. Instead, what only mattered was the brand of LeBron James. LeBron James, if not either the first or second greatest basketball player of all time, is also something else, the most marketable basketball player of all time. On this, he cannot be questioned, even by those who are diehard fans of his biggest historical rival, Michael Jordan. This is also something amazing when you think about it, because Jordan has the most historical sneaker line in the history of the world, one that has made him a billionaire solely by earnings alone. He made a film with the Looney Tunes that is still relevant to this day. LeBron even copied it in a cheap remake. He was on the covers of Wheaties boxes, dined with world leaders, and drank Gatorade for tens of thousands a sip. Overtaking Jordan from a business standpoint, not to mention his incredible skills on the court, was once thought to be an impossibility. Until LeBron did so. He was dubbed the quote-unquote chosen one in a Sports Illustrated cover and feature story when he was just in high school. He later got those words tattooed on his back. He signed on to multiple endorsement deals with the biggest brands in the world, including Gatorade and Nike, just like Jordan. As his career progressed along the same timeline as More Than a Game, he created a production company, Uninterrupted, along with several other investment vehicles and portfolios. He infiltrated culture by helping to pioneer and popularize the early career of a young Canadian rapper named Aubrey Graham, then just a teen sitcom star who was trying to pen a career as an aspiring rapper named Drake. To put the bow on it, James and his best friend / agent Maverick Carter negotiated a lifetime contract with Nike that also netted him $1 billion. But even still, nothing could touch the brand that was LeBron James. He's appeared in everything from commercial lending commercials to sports betting Instagram ads. He shifted our politics, our culture, where we are in the current standing in society in America. No athlete since Muhammad Ali, not even Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Michael Phelps, Serena Williams, anybody else, has had this level of influence. The reason, like Ali and like LeBron's documentary said, he distinguished himself from basketball. He was indeed more than just a player in a game. And whether we like it or not, that phrase and that documentary itself changed American sports forever. Now, athletes were no longer primarily known as athletes. Instead, it was what they could do outside of the realm of athletics that was paramount. What stances do they take on social issues? Who were they dating? What were their investments like? What do they think about things like gay marriage or Joe Biden or the federal funds rate? Now, everyone deserves to have an opinion, of course. We are all Americans. There is no one who has a monopoly on ideas of any sort or kind. We should all express ourselves if asked, particularly if we have a platform for change. And athletes have always had that, going all the way back to the days when the great Jesse Owens defied Adolf Hitler at the 1936 Olympic Games. However, this was very different. Jesse Owens was still primarily a track and field athlete, even though he wanted to stand up for Black Americans. Michael Jordan was still primarily a basketball player, even if he negotiated a massive sneaker deal that Republicans could indulge in too. Patrick Mahomes is still primarily a football player, even if he and Trey Smith, on occasion, appear in too much with the Jake from State Farm guy for my liking. Instead, what was different about LeBron James was that he instigated a complete decoupling of athletes from the foundation of the sports they played. It was no longer primarily about the game itself. It was instead about the athlete, him or herself. Gone was the emphasis on collaboration, sportsmanship, teamwork, and the collective pursuit of a goal. In its place was a revitalized sense of entitled individualism, idolatry, and hero worship. This was something very new and something that had never been seen before in sports. And it should be noted that this is not all a bad thing, obviously. The overwhelming amount of athletes, in my view, especially today, do great things with their money. Most of them want to take care of their families, give back to their communities, and live their lives like normal people. Are there a couple of buffoons who go to strip clubs too often and buy a bajillion cars they don't need? Always. But as is with any industry at the top echelons of success, just ask the guys on Wall Street. Yet still totally different. So given this, we must ask a question underneath all of this. What exactly is and was the foundation of American sports? And you'll get many answers when you ask this question. Many will say things like I named above: collaboration, sportsmanship, teamwork, and the collective pursuit of a goal. Some who don't understand will say things like irrelevant, patriarchal, or exclusive. Others will say things like competition, championships, and victory. Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing, as Vince Lombardi once said. Some of these were my answers, as well as probably yours. But all of these answers, as it turns out, are wrong. Because the right answer to this question, as stated in their very foundings, blew my mind. Christian spiritual formation. As soon as I started to do some digging on this, I rolled my eyes. Really, another Christianese buzzword that is thrown around far too often, one that woke pastors in New York and Portland say that they can avoid talking about, so they can avoid talking about things like sin and the wrath of God. Yuck. However, and thankfully, American sports have been around for far longer than woke pastors in New York and Portland. So I put aside my senses and began to do some digging for myself. And to start, I actually had to find out what the term, quote-unquote, spiritual formation was. And to be very honest, I still really don't have much of an idea. There are so many definitions, interpretations, that there has not really been one that has been ubiquitously popularized. So to simplify it, I have come up with my own definition, God help me, based on all the others, that I believe fits well. Christian formation is the development of Christian character through the process of sanctification. In other words, for the non-Christians out there, the process of becoming more like Jesus by becoming a better person, as Jesus was. So fair enough. But that doesn't answer the ultimate question of what we began this discussion with. What exactly is the purpose of sports? Why did Christian formation apparently play such a big role in their development and popularization? In essence, why do sports matter to Americans as much as they do? In a post-Christian America, they are the closest thing we have to a civic religion. We build modern-day cathedrals for them. Our fans have rituals before, during, and after games. Tribalistic rivalries run rampant. In this context, the title More Than a Game certainly seems apt. In fact, I would take it actually a step further, because sports, in my view, are not just athletic competitions, and moreover, they're not just expressions of broader virtues. Instead, at their core, what the culture of American sports has always been based on is very specific and incredibly important. The spiritual, most notably Christian, development of young men through the eternal and timeless virtues emphasized within the Bible. Now, you won't hear this mentioned on the rundown on SportsCenter. Colin Cowherd and Stephen A. Smith will never open one of their shows this type of a monologue. But it doesn't mean that it's not true. And not only is it not untrue, it's necessary and needed now more than ever beforehand. The lack of discipleship in young men in America today is a travesty. It breaks chains in legacies. It destroys the cohesion of the family. It displaces fathers from their purpose. And when looked at from this angle and this lens, there has been no vehicle in the history of America that has been greater at this than the development of American sports. Through various organizations, mostly based in localized community settings through civic engagement and support, young men were brought up to understand life through adversity by older, wiser men who had already gone through said adversity. These men were hardly, if at all, paid to do this. Instead, they did this and still do this for a very different reason: to promote virtue, to pass down their values to the next generation of young men, to help bring them up in the ways of the world. In other words, discipleship. This is not hyperbole nor made up. In the late 1800s, this philosophy was brought to life in a movement known as, and I'm not kidding by the way, Muscular Christianity. Beginning in England with rugby leagues, muscular Christianity took its root from, like many, the Apostle Paul. And Paul, for those who don't know his writings, wrote immensely about one topic in particular: suffering. In the book of Philippians, for example, he talks about dying for Jesus Christ as the greatest thing one can gain. In 1 Timothy, he emphasizes the importance of physical training in relation to godliness. In 2 Timothy, he emphasizes the process of the Christian walk as akin to the running of a race. This mirrored his own life, one in which he was beaten, shipwrecked, mocked, scorned, and ultimately martyred for his faith. His whole life was a competition. Everything was uphill. The muscular Christianity movement took the same ethos as the life of the Apostle Paul. The muscular Christians took the stance that it was not only a nicety, but a Christian virtue to be athletic. This was popularized, by the way, when Teddy Roosevelt took the White House in the early 1900s. They wanted Christians to take the advice of the Bible and one of its main authors, Paul, and apply it to every part of their life to enhance their walk with Christ. In addition, with the world changing rapidly, the evangelists and ministers of our time needed a tool to help young people in innovative and new ways, particularly with what they deemed the most important group, young men. And that vehicle was sports. The muscular Christians wanted the Christian virtue of athleticism to not only be used for a tool of physical fitness, but of ministry. Through the organization of young men around excellence of the body and social interactions, they could gather large numbers of young men to talk with them about how to emphasize the whole person in pursuit of a uniform goal as a body, i.e., a team. It was genius, and it planted a seed that has lasted for generations. And some, when they hear this, will be tempted to not believe me. Is this really real? And I would be asking the same question, to be fair, because I was dumbfounded when I first heard this. And yet, it is unequivocally true. Historical evidence proves it. For example, the founder of American basketball was a man by the name of James Naismith. Most basketball fans know that name from either prestigious awards named after him or the Hall of Fame that bears his name, the one that currently enshrines Michael Jordan and will soon enshrine LeBron James. He is largely deemed the most influential person in the initial popularization of basketball. However, if James Naismith invented basketball, this begs a question. What was he doing before he invented basketball? Primarily, two things. First, Naismith was a trained minister in Protestant Christianity and an ordained pastor in the Word of God. Second, to make money, Naismith took on a job as an instructor at a place called the Young Men's Christian Association, otherwise known as the YMCA. The ministry that Naismith chose to pioneer was not anything the American church had seen before: sports. Naismith developed basketball not to launch people into endorsement deals, sign NIL contracts, or win championships. Instead, Naismith developed basketball as a mission field, one that could gather young men in a mutual spirit of healthy competition that they had competed in for generations. Every basketball player who has ever walked the earth, particularly those who have gotten fabulously wealthy from it, owe something not just to James Naismith, but to the God he worshipped, Jesus. Alongside Naismith, a muscular Christian named Walter Camp, a deeply religious Episcopalian, took to a different sport than Naismith: American football. Camp, like Naismith, is now known for much more prestigious awards and football lore than his Christian faith. Yet his influence on football can't be overstated. He goes back so far that he created the line of scrimmage. Yet his philosophy was very different from what is popularized in American football today. Much like Naismith, and in a very different yet similar way to LeBron James, Camp viewed football as quote-unquote more than a game. Camp himself stated that the goal of playing football was not to win. Instead, it was to develop boys into young men through Christian character, emphasized through sports. Quote, "Nature has provided in the boy's love of personal physical combat and competition the real suggestion as to how to instill desired habits and character traits. Training means restraint and temperance and ultimate perfect physical condition. Without the game, there would be little interest, and without the rivalry, there would be no training." End quote. This is exactly right. You judge a tree by its fruits. Taken in its proper context, the fruit of American sports has been one of the most positive cultural developments in the history of our nation. It brought together communities from across the country in a unifying front for celebration and fellowship. It promoted the family through order, structure, and traditional values. Perhaps most importantly of all, it encouraged fathers and older men to coach and disciple both their and other children through involvement, mentorship, and presence. And it's sad to say that this is not the state of American sports today. Gone are the days of community fellowship, mental and physical development, and the involvement of families and fathers. Instead, it has transitioned to become, quote-unquote, more than a game, not the game itself. The only thing sports seem to be good and useful for now is the building and platforming of brands to sell things and people. The game is no longer the point. What the game can get you is the point. But just because a narrative has changed doesn't mean that that narrative is all of a sudden untrue, because at its core, the game still is the point. It doesn't matter how much our athletes have been elevated to the status hierarchy. It doesn't matter how much money tries to corrupt and pollute sports to make them all about energy drinks and online gambling sites. The game is still what matters, because without the game and the virtues attached to the game, none of the other things running alongside them would have the opportunity to flourish. And I've, by the way, long lampooned people, particularly those in the socially conservative right, of which I'm very much a member, for being what I deem too legalistic in their criticism of sports. So what if the NFL wants to put, quote-unquote, end racism in their end zones, or the NBA wants to put Black Lives Matter on their courts? Who cares if Steve Kerr wants to spout out about ICE or police brutality after a game like the douchebag that he is? What does it matter, really, if someone wants to kneel for the national anthem? Well, as it turns out, I was wrong about all of these things, because these things matter. Why? Because culture matters. And there is no bigger driver in modern America across our political and social lines than sports. They, for better or for worse, affect everything. This is the reason why sports getting hijacked for purposes beyond sports, whether it's for money, politics, or whatever else, matters immensely. It matters because it deviates from the entire point, which was the original point, to instill Christian character and virtue into young men so that they would be brought up in ways that would better the world. Period, point blank, full stop. What has happened instead? Instead, cultural leftism has been promoted. The biggest sign of cultural leftism infecting an institution? Constant, unceasing talk about the self, about what the institution can do for the individual, not what the individual can do to benefit the institution. It should absolutely be a two-way street, mind you. College athletes should have opportunities to get paid. Players should advocate for things like insurance, fair pay, and health care. But to say that athletes can leave their sports and teams holding the bag out of nowhere is ludicrous. It's unsustainable. More importantly, it is teaching horrible lessons to the future generations, most especially young men, all of whom look up to these as the standard bearers of what masculinity and patriotism look like. Sports are not political because sports were never designed to be political. Instead, sports are something far more important: spiritual. The Christian origin story of sports is one that needs to be retold, revitalized, and remembered. The reason why American sports cannot go the way of American corporations and entertainment is that American sports are far more important than both. Cultural bastions must be maintained, because if they're not, our culture will continue to degrade itself. Sports are indeed more than a game, just not in the way we were originally told that they were. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and I know this is kind of a deeper and a bit of a wild turn of events, but hear me out here. So American leftists knew that in order to shift the culture away from things like Christianity, traditional values, they had to infiltrate those institutions. And this is called, Marcuse wrote about this, all the people that were really the famous leftist Marxist philosophers. They called this the long march through the institutions. So what happened was that leftists and Marxists, they would take control of various institutions, government institutions, civic institutions, cultural institutions, and they would slowly but surely change them, pervert their values, move them away from what they originally were meant to do, and basically infiltrate them and take them captive and make them into something that they weren't. And the same has happened with sports. The same thing has happened with American corporations. The same thing has happened with entertainment, with movies, with government for sure, with everything. The church primarily. And so, thankfully, sports have put up a fight in recent years, and they have lost a lot of these fights, mind you. They definitely haven't been perfect in this regard. We're not batting 1,000 to say the least, but there have been several inroads made with American sports on how they have slowly but surely influence the culture of sports and not the other way around. And so, as mentioned throughout, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the whole muscular Christianity movement, the whole point of American sports in general was to develop character, was to disciple and bring up young men primarily. And I know women play sports too, obviously, but sports were designed initially for young men as a way of discipleship, as a way of community orientation, as a way of a lot of other things that can, basically make things appear in XYZ way, which is a great thing, and we should celebrate that. But to make that manifest, there had to be some inroads that were made to do that. And so what were those? So in recency, there has been a lot of emphasis on individualism throughout sports, and that's no surprise or to anyone who watches them, really. I mean, we just had the Olympics, and we had a lot of other things happen there. Olympics are really, we'll get to the men's hockey team later on, but Olympics are primarily individualized sports, but I want to talk about team sports as well, because there has been a lot of reasons and a lot of things how this landscape of American sports has slowly but surely become a cultural battleground over time. And really the first thing, and I think the biggest thing that has happened really culturally in America, but especially in sports, is that there has been a de-emphasis on duty, on doing things because you should do them. And so there's the famous clip of Charles Barkley, I believe in the 90s, this is either late 90s or the late 80s or early 90s, where Charles Barkley said the quiet part out loud, as he has done many times. I love Charles. Charles is really funny. But he said the quiet part out loud. He's always been a very outspoken person, that athletes should not be role models. I'm not a role model. You should not look up to me. You should become a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher. Do not grow up and become a basketball player. Do not be like me. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to make my money. I'm going to play my sport, and I'm going to be done with everything. And so Charles, that was a watershed moment, because in all honesty, it was really refreshing. Probably, I wasn't alive at the time, to hear someone say that, and particularly as someone who is as gifted and was skilled and was as great as Charles Barkley was when he played in the NBA. But this was always a very perplexing thing to me, and a very troubling thing in a lot of ways too, because when Charles said that out loud, like he said, the quiet part out loud is mentioned, because athletes were once held in esteem, rather, for reasons for children primarily to look up to them. So athletes were on the cover of Wheaties boxes. At this time, they were in commercials. The NBA was blowing up all over the world. There was a lot of focus on celebrity endorsements, everything like that, like Mean Joe Green with the Pepsi commercial, the Coke commercial in the 70s. And then now this is very commercialized. Everything was getting, massive endorsement deals were being handed out, etc. And so athletes were once held in esteem for reasons primarily for children, primarily for young men to look up to them. These are the people that are getting a massive platform. Kids love playing games. Kids love watching games, lots of other things, which therefore would compel athletes and compel sports organizations, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, all of their teams, to put a standard on their athletes so that children could look up to them. So which therefore compelled them in a good way towards a higher standard of excellence to themselves, to the community, and to the team. You didn't just have to be a great basketball player. You had to be a nice person. You had to carry yourself a certain way. You had to look a certain way, dress a certain way, treat people a certain way. And this is not really just, or I shouldn't say this is not really, this is not in general something that has really been a stranger to American communities in a lot of ways, because this is, I think, the standard in a lot of other arenas as well. I mean, because you think about other people and other people of influence in the culture. You think about teachers, about police officers, about firefighters, about business people. The point of elevation in anything, of hierarchical status, is because you want someone to model that person. This is why religion is important. This is why politics is important. This is why CEOs are important, because the standard bearer of anything, whether it's a company or it's a religious institution or it's a sports team, you want people to elevate themselves to be the ideal and be the representative, the face of the franchise, to use a sports analogy, as anything in that organization. And this was good for them. This is good for the athletes. This is good for culture. This is good for the teams. Good for everybody. But this has been degraded over time, because it is not about what, again, the individual can do for society. It is all about what the society can do for the individual. It is no longer a give and a take relationship. It is now just a take, and I'm going to do whatever I want relationship. I don't owe anything to my team. I don't owe anything to my community. I don't owe anything to the fans. I don't owe anything to etc. And I should say this too, there are a lot of athletes that don't feel this way. There are a lot of athletes who have tremendous relationships with the community, with their fans, with their organization, with their team. They show tremendous loyalty. They show tremendous ways of advancing in this way, shape, or form, whatever. But what I'm seeing more and more of, and I think this is receding a little bit, but it's not receding as much as it should, is these athletes are now just very entitled to everybody else owes me something. It's more of a victim mindset. I work so hard. I play my hardest. I put my body on the line. I do X, Y, and Z, and therefore everybody owes me, and I don't owe anybody else a darn thing. And that mentality of entitlement, of victimization, of whatever you want to call it, that's destructive in my view. And what that's led to is an emphasis on player empowerment. And so this has been a very, very big trend throughout all of sports, particularly over the last, I would say, really 10 years, I would think, 10 to 15 probably. This is really, I would say, primarily taking place in basketball, although in football it's slowly trickling in there too. But basketball is really prevalent in that sport. And nothing against basketball, it's just kind of the way that the sport works. But really, this has helped the movement of this increased individualism out, because now the players are demanding more from the organization. They're demanding more from their fans. They're demanding more from X, Y, and Z. There's lots of things that are in that vein, in that virtue, in that sense. And so, and by the way, I'm for player empowerment. Like I'm an anti institutional authority guy. I'm very much abrasive against all of those things. I don't like the government being too big. I don't like sports teams being too powerful. I don't like everything else, because I do believe, I look back at, particularly even like in college sports in particular, about 10 years ago, about how much money college athletes and amateurism made universities, who are leeching off of everybody, their students, their athletes, their coaches, to make money, whether that's hospital chains or merchandise selling or drink sales or whatever. They legalized, they could sell beer at college football games a couple years ago, and that was a massive boon in revenue for the universities, everything like that. But the power in sports has now shifted way far over. The pendulum has shifted way far over into now the players and the people at the bottom having all the power and them dictating up to the institutions, which has caused this back and forth mess, particularly, like I said, in amateur sports, particularly in college football, college basketball. It's just a mess now, particularly I would say in college football. And so now what this has done is it's uprooted a lot of the traditional virtues. They're being excised from football, from basketball, from anywhere you can ask. And everything about muscular Christianity, about what they are, about what the muscular Christians wanted to basically instill into athletes, is either being devalued, pushed out, perverted for different reasons. They're not doing, sports are very, very different than they were initially founded for, because the elevation of the individual has taken all the emphasis off of the duty of the individual. Now the individual dictates to the institutions rather than the institutions dictating to the individual. And there should be a balance back and forth, as I mentioned, but this is a problem. And this is a very big problem, I would argue, in many, many ways. And now what this has resulted in is, again, particularly over the last decade, I would say, is an alignment with social justice. And this is the cherry on top of everything. It was the infiltration via social justice of all of the major sports leagues. And this took, as it does with everything, it took the expressive individualist tone up to another level and used it to catalyze a new version of what, quote unquote, player empowerment looked like. Because now players could only be empowered by the institutions if they adopted a certain mentality and a certain agenda with their ranks. And so this cultural leftism that infiltrated sports coerced the institutions of sports to empower players that only aligned with Black Lives Matter, that only aligned with anti-conservative, anti-Donald Trump sentiment, that only aligned with people who are anti-Christian in many ways. And so the people who were on the opposite side of those things, Brett Favre, for example, Nick Bosa, for example, Jonathan Isaac in some ways. I'm trying to think who else. A lot of the UFC guys. That's why Dana White isn't very popular with a lot of the media. That's why a lot of the UFC athletes are not very popular and don't go mainstream a lot of the times. That's why a lot of them have been pushed out of the mainstream, even though UFC, I would argue, is one of probably the most popular sport outside of football in the country right now for at least a certain demographic. And really what this did was that it took away a lot of the relatability of the athletes to the fans, because sports were built for, as I mentioned in my monologue, for the common person, for people who wanted to invest in local community, in families, in father-son relationships, in sports leagues, in whichever they were saying. And it was a very common working middle class agrarian, not agrarian, that's not the right word, but it was a very kind of like salt of the earth way that people could relate to one another. And professional sports were obviously an elevated microcosm of that. But now, with many of the people in sports, they've become so unrelatable to their fans that it's caused this consternation and this tension between fans, organizations, the teams, compared to the stars, the people who are getting elevated in the sports landscape, which is a major problem, because when their relatability is broken between any relationship, that means there is no really unifying principle. There's no tying together of anything that builds trust, builds authority, builds relationship with anybody in that space, which is a major problem, I think, because when you take the relatability away, you take a lot of other things away with it. And when you take relatability and the other things that are tying people together in relationship, you don't have a relationship anymore. And then it becomes grandstanding and elitism and a bunch of different things, which is why sports feel so at war with the fans and the culture right now. And again, I think this is getting better, but I think it's a trend that's been happening, which I think is really fascinating, because if sports are really the last third space and really the only third space left in America, then we need sports to not be at war with the average American. And I think, unfortunately, for many reasons, they have been. And it needs to stop, or else it's going to continue to degenerate, and that relatability will continue to be lost. And so let's then contrast this with muscular Christianity. And I kid you not, there is a whole literature on this. I encourage you all to look it up. I'm not making it up. Muscular Christianity was a thing, and I am here for it. So muscular Christianity, to go back to my monologue, was what sports were initially meant for. And that was what the whole goal of sports was. It was a method of sanctification, of discipleship, of bringing young men up to become more like Jesus. Now, could Jesus throw a football 80 yards down the field? Could he, kick a goal from 100 yards out? Could he, shoot a bunch of three-pointers? I'm sure if Jesus were to get on a court or a field right now, he'd just wipe the floor with everybody, because Jesus was the best at everything throughout all the course of human history. But that's not the point. And there's a lot of memes about this. There are a lot of, Instagram influencers that talk about this, and it's kind of it's a funny thing. It's a trite conversation. It doesn't really matter. No. Is it funny? Yes. Is it true? I mean, I guess so, but that's really not the point of all of it. But I love the philosophy of muscular Christianity. I have a friend, a really good friend and a spiritual brother to me, my friend Mike, who is a very big a fitness influencer, a Christian fitness influencer. I know a lot of Christian fitness influencers, actually. And I see this kind of manifesting and making a comeback in some of the corners of social media, of the manosphere, of this kind of Christian pill masculinity that's kind of emerging in the corners of YouTube and Reddit and social media algorithms and the internet, everything like that. And I love it. I am a very, very big fan of this biblical masculinity movement, of this, this emphasis on physicality in terms of that being a form of worship, of that being a form of, discipleship, of that being a form of self-control, of being a fruit of the Spirit, all of those things. It's been really cool. But we have a long ways to go before muscular Christianity makes a comeback and gets into the culture in the way that it was before. I think that it's working, and I think that we need to emphasize that in many ways. And so sports have an opportunity to expedite that process. And so the whole point, again, of Muscular Christianity was not to win championships, not to get young men scholarships, not to do any of those things. Although that would be certainly a wonderful thing if that does happen. And I think that very well could happen in many ways. But we have an opportunity to expedite that process. The point of sports is to disciple young men. And Christian men in particular, I know because I am one, we have an obligation. We are told and commanded in Scripture to be excellent. And particularly to be fit, to be strong, to be people that exemplify and honor God with our bodies. And so there are a lot of ways that we can do this, and why Christian men in particular have a reason and a right to be strong, to be fit, to be fast, to be jacked. I think that's an obligation. I think that's a work of God that we do that with everything else. And so really the first reason, and I want to talk about stewardship, I want to talk about worship, I want to talk about evangelism, because I think stewardship, worship, and evangelism are three things that can come from muscular Christianity. Muscular Christianity, it's a lot of syllables. Muscular Christianity, it can come from treating your body in a way that is honorable to God. And so the first one is a verse that we hear all the time and that all of the Christian influencers talk about in the fitness space quite a bit, being that your body is a temple. Your body's a temple. That's what Paul writes. And so going back to the writings of Paul, this is a commentary on stewardship. So you are not the owner of anything. You are the manager. God is the owner of your money, of your body, of your relationships, of your soul, of your desires. You are just managing them for the short time you are on earth until you get to heaven. And now, what does that mean, though, in the context? So when Paul is referencing that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, that means a couple of things. One, the temple that was originally built, designed by David, built by Solomon, took an immense amount of labor to build. I believe it's in Chronicles and 1 Kings that the temple of the Lord was built, where God hands down and David hands down all of these measurements and everything that's done with how many people built the temple and what the temple should be made of, and it was built in Jerusalem and eventually was destroyed in 70 AD, but this is where Jews from around the world, Christians from around the world came and worshiped God on Passover, and they offered sacrifices there, and the Sanhedrin was there, and they did all these things where they made sacrifices, and they went into the inner place, the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, where they talked about, basically all these things. But what I find interesting when I did research on this and when I read the scriptures again, I've read the Bible and this section of the Bible a lot, but I really wanted to dive into this, was the level of care. And the temple was built with the finest set of materials and dealt with the finest level of discernment and all these other things. And so when Paul writes that your body should be treated with the same level of reverence as the temple, because the temple does not exist now, the Holy Spirit dwells in all of us, I think he's taking that very literally, in the sense that, hey, the original temple was built with all of this grandeur, with all of this care, with all of this level of decency about it. So therefore, you should take your body with the same level of care. You should treat your body with the same level of reverence. And we should make sure that it is. You should eat right. You should work out. That is not only something you should do physically. That is something you should do for spiritual purposes. It is obedience to God that you are doing these things. Through obedience to God that you're doing these things. Because the Holy Spirit, if it literally does dwell inside of you, that's what Christians believe, you should make that a nice place for the Holy Spirit to dwell. You should make sure that you're treating it right. Don't treat your temple like a trash can. And so physical fitness, treating your body with a level of respect in a way that you do so in reverence to God, is a very, very important thing. Now, self-control is how you get a lot of these things. You need to be disciplined. You need to have self-control. Self-control is described in Galatians 5 as a fruit of the Spirit. It is more, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I believe this is a commentary on worship. Because fruit is worship. What you do is worship. Work is worship. Working out is worship. How you treat people is worship, which is a fruit of the Spirit. And my pastor, Doug Weckerman, gave a great sermon on this last year where he talked about brain chemistry. And so my pastor, he has had a lot of issues with his physical health. He's had chronic pain, chronic headaches for, I believe, close to 20 years. At this point, I believe he gets a migraine almost every single day, and he has to work through that in various different ways. And so he has been doing a lot of research on the brain, a lot of research on physical health, a lot of research on science. And he gave the sermon on dopamine and how that relates to Christianity and brain chemistry. It was our only sermon that has gone viral in that way. And so if you've seen any sermon from my church, Red Rocks Austin, you've probably seen that one. Although a lot of our sermons have been very, very good. It's just that one kind of took and went off because of Andrew Huberman and Anna Lemke and all the people that write about dopamine and all those type of things. So in that sermon, what I thought was really interesting is that Doug talked about the fruits of the Spirit. He talked about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and then self-control. At the end of it, I'm sure I'm leaving out one or two, but all of those ones, it's a very famous verse. And he called self-control the vegetable of the Spirit, which I thought was a really funny analogy because of all of the fruits of the Spirit that get emphasized, self-control is always the one that people don't talk about. It's always love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness. All of those things are emphasized a lot, particularly in modern day evangelical Christianity, where a lot of people are seeker sensitive and we want to seem feminized and seem appealing and everything else. And if, a pastor tells you that you need to control yourself and submit your desires to God and everything, you're somehow oppressing that person or whatever, which is stupid and doesn't make any sense, but it's just the way people see things. And again, everyone likes to talk about other fruits of the Spirit, which have all been, by the way, largely co-opted by Marxist language, social justice language, and this has really been infiltrated in the church quite a bit, and it's been taking it away from muscular Christianity. And Doug's point was the future belongs to those who can exercise self-control, particularly with all of the social media algorithms, with all of the things like pornography, with cheap food, with hookup culture, with everything like that. If you are able to exercise self-control, if you are able to have the fruit of the Spirit of self-control, you are going to own the future. Because the whole point of the modern culture, of the modern world, is to take away and degrade your self-control and to remove yourself from submitting your desires to something that's greater than yourself, namely Christianity, your world philosophy, the way that you treat your body, etc. And that demands that you submit self-control over all of your life. What goes in your mouth, what you eat, what you cook, how much you get outside, how much you go into nature, how you work your body out, how much you sweat, all of those things. And so we are called to self-control, to steward our bodies as a form of worship as well. And the last thing I want to talk about is evangelism. And this is maybe a stretch, but I don't think it is. So Christians are called to be holy. Holy means set apart. We don't look like the rest of the world. We're called to be in the world, not of the world, as Scripture says. And everything you do, as Paul writes, do for the glory of God, which is evangelism. And so there's a difference, I think, between glorifying God and honoring God, even though there's a lot of crossover there. There's a lot of things that people can say that are similar and that are different, and there's some of both, obviously, in those ways. But we are called to glorify God, to make God exemplified, to make God excellent, to make God, to basically show and spread the goodness of God to everybody, not just to honor God personally, but to glorify Him publicly, to show the world and to those who do not know Jesus what that looks like. And the way that we do that is by not looking like everyone else, by not doing things like everybody else. Now, this is not saying we should draw attention to ourselves or act wild and crazy and do all these reactionary things like everybody else does. That, in my view, would be acting exactly like the world wants you to act. And so the way that you present yourself and the way that you act is a tool of evangelism. The rest of the world, the average physical health of a person in America right now is not good. Overweight or obese, eating way too many ultra-processed foods, carbs, not working out enough. I believe my boxing coach, Sean Apperson, once told me that I believe 70% of Americans don't actively exercise. Like, that's crazy to me. And so our bodies are a way of evangelism, of saying that I take care of myself because I want to honor God, because God resides in me. The Holy Spirit is in me. It's not gate-kept, it's in me, and therefore I need to look different, reside different, be holy, be set apart to spread the word of God to everybody else. And I don't think there's any more important tool than that to show the world that we're different. And to show the world we're different means you need to act different, which means you need to treat our bodies differently than everybody else, which is the point of muscular Christianity, leaning into suffering, doing the hard things, getting up before the sun, working out, lifting heavy weights, running far distances in fast times, eating various things that are different than the world eats, because it's not just about you and your vanity and how you look and making your body an idol and all of those things that, mealy-mouthed, weak-willed Christian men will say about, well, I don't want to make my body an idol. It's like, well, you make your body an idol by stuffing your face with Twinkies every single day because you're making it something that's subpar and you're treating your body in a way that is degrading towards God, in my view. And I don't think that's heresy or exercising Scripture in a way that's not accurate. But that's what I believe the muscular Christians were getting at. I think it's a great philosophy to have, and I think that we should do a lot more of it, because if we did more of it, we would probably have a lot less issues in the church compared to where we're at now, especially when it comes to issues of taking care of our bodies, of stewarding our bodies well, and having everything that really matters depending on how we want to spread the word of God. I'll put it that way. So after all that, we got to talk about Bad Bunny. So we got to talk about Bad Bunny. We got to talk about the halftime show. We got to talk about what happened at the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago at this time where this is going to come out. So a lot of people, myself included, were very upset when Bad Bunny was announced as the halftime show performance. And this is not because Bad Bunny is effeminate. It's not because Bad Bunny is Latino. It's not because Bad Bunny is, XYZ. The reason why Bad Bunny should have been an affront to the NFL fan base, to people like me, a red-blooded American male, was not because of any of those things. I know a lot of Latin guys that love football. I know a lot of people that are, whatever, all the things that I just said. The reason why Bad Bunny headlining the Super Bowl halftime show was a problem was because it wasn't reflective of American values. Bad Bunny is not an American. Bad Bunny has no idea what American values are like. Bad Bunny is not a reflection of America. The Super Bowl is the greatest displaying of American might culturally on the world stage. There's nothing that even comes close. Like we have very little, like we are a new nation relative to the nations of the world. We are 250 years old as we move on throughout the next, we're going to be 250 years old in July. And so we are a relatively new nation compared to everything else. We do not have a lot of deep, rich culture compared to a lot of the people that founded major world religions or were, basically the spearheads of political movements, all those things, even though American culture is deep and is rich and we shouldn't demean it, but we're just not as old or as traditional as everybody else. And so therefore, we need to take advantage when we have it. And the biggest thing we have by far is the Super Bowl. And so when we platform somebody like Bad Bunny with sexualized lyrics, a foreign-born mentality towards the United States, commenting on our politics, commenting on our culture, and how, XYZ things, it's like it's not a reflection of America. And the halftime show at the Super Bowl, and by the way, there's been a lot of them that have not been very good of recent. Like, Shakira and J-Lo was bad. Beyonce was bad. The best one in my view was Bruno Mars. Bruno Mars was the best halftime show I've ever seen. And by the way, the national anthem was very good this year. And, a lot of other, and the national anthem was very good. America the Beautiful was very good. A lot of that was great. And I'm hoping that that everyone saw that, because that was an excellent display of American cultural might in that way. I thought Charlie Puth did a great job. I thought a lot of people that did that did a phenomenal job. But the halftime show was just it was not it. It was just not it. And the halftime show needs to be a American perspective on what's going on in America, not a foreign perspective on what's going on in America. And so, ironically, it's a reflection of where we've been going for a long time, because we imported, hypothetically speaking, but actually not hypothetically speaking, a foreign perspective to tell what was going on in America, which is why it was all the anti-ICE stuff. It was all the hey, like Americans are so bad, look at how they're treating the rest of the world. That's not what the halftime show should have been about. And that's not just because I support ICE or because I support the Trump administration, whatever. That's a broader point. It's a point about multiculturalism. The point where Bad Bunny comes in is that it's saying that another culture has equal weight in the biggest American event of the year, the defining American event of the year, the Super Bowl. In my view, a national holiday throughout the rest of America culturally. We don't have much when it comes to cultural unification in America, especially right now. The Super Bowl is about all we have. And what I believe the halftime show proved was that multiculturalism doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And it's been a failed experiment everywhere it's been tried. It's been a failed experiment when it comes to immigration. It's been a failed experiment when it comes to gender policy. It's been a failed experiment when it comes to us going into Middle Eastern countries, whatever it's been. It's not just Bad Bunny doing all of his songs in Spanish, making no attempt to appease the people of California by, speaking English or doing anything like that. But it was, what I saw it as was just a massive troll. Like, it was just a 20-minute long just troll of American values and American sports and American people, with all the gender bending weirdness and men humping each other and all the dress stuff. Like, it platformed every value that the founders of football, that the founders of American sports, that the founders of America generally would have recoiled at. Like, it spit in the face of what sports actually are supposed to do, which is disciple young men to be better men. And we didn't do that. The Super Bowl failed at doing that. And this is a commentary on a lot of things, but I think it's a commentary really on the NFL. And there's no sport I love more than NFL football. I love NFL football, and I love college football. I love the UFC. I like watching basketball. I like watching all sports, really, with the exceptions of some. But the NFL is my favorite. It will always be my favorite. There will be nothing that will displace it. And so the main issue that pro football is running into right now, and we have to get a handle on this as Americans, as fans, is that the NFL, especially now, has been Baal worshiping for a very long time. So for those who aren't Christian, Baal is the god of status, the god of money, the god of he's the demon counterfeit Christ. And basically it's the Babylonians worshipped him. And so essentially the NFL, the reason why the NFL can get away with something like platforming Bad Bunny, and the reason why the NFL is still growing, unlike the NBA, which after the disaster of the 2020 COVID stuff and the Black Lives Matter stuff, the NBA took a massive hit. And it's still taking a massive hit right now. It's never recovered since then, from its zenith back in the mid-2010s and late 2010s. It's never recovered. It might be on the way back up right now, but it's got a long way to go. They really, really did themselves a very big disservice. The NFL is growing by leaps and bounds. And the NFL is the most well-run organization in American sports by far. But the issue that I foresee the NFL having, and I think the Bad Bunny thing is a microcosm of it, is the NFL is beholden to one class of people, which is the 32 owners of the NFL franchises. The NFL is dominated and controlled by the owners of the sports teams. It is not a publicly traded company. The fans, with the exception of the Packers, because the Packers, quote unquote, own the team, even though that's complicated. But really, it's just a couple of centralized individuals and people who own NFL franchise. The same in the NBA. It's the same in the MLB. It's the same in soccer. And the commissioner of the NFL, who's Roger Goodell, who has done, I think, a pretty good job of running the NFL. He's grown the NFL. He's allowed for them taking in more revenue, for more cultural clout, everything like that. I think actually Roger Goodell deserves more credit in some ways than he's given. I know a lot of people. I know my My family and a lot of people around, we come from a really big football family. A lot of them do not like Roger Goodell, and I understand why they don't like Roger Goodell. And I don't like Roger Goodell for some ways, whether it's the lockout stuff or he's been horrible on domestic violence stuff, on suspensions, on various things. Like Roger Goodell has done a lot of things wrong. But what Roger Goodell has been very good at is making NFL owners more money, which is why they love Roger Goodell and why he gets paid close to $200 million for being the commissioner of the NFL. And the way that Roger Goodell has largely expanded the NFL revenue base, and by making NFL owners more money, is through expanding the international market, international games, international artists, social justice, getting away from America and going into other parts of the world, making Bad Bunny do the halftime, or inviting Bad Bunny to do the halftime show. We're doing games in Ireland, in Brazil, in Germany, in Spain, in X, Y, and it's like, why? And I understand football's for everybody, and football's the best game that's ever been invented in the face of the planet. I want the world to experience it more. Canadian football, love it. Arena football, love it. XFL, love it. And do I hope that the world starts to adopt, their own American-style football leagues? Of course I do. But American football is uniquely American. It's not like basketball. It's not like MMA. It's not like soccer. It's not like anything else. It is a strictly American thing. It's the only true American sport other than probably baseball, even though baseball's kind of world, it has a worldly presence. But baseball and football are primarily the two American sports, but particularly football. And so when I see things like the Bad Bunny halftime show and all these international games and things like that, and call me like an American nationalist or whatever, but I view it as, we need to keep it pure. We need to keep football American. And I don't know, again, call me all the names you want, but that's just my view on the whole thing. And that's why I think the Bad Bunny thing got under people's skin so much. And, I know there was the Turning Point USA halftime show, which was really a huge success. I think it reached, about 25 million people tuned in and watched it when the Bad Bunny thing happened. And that was a tremendous win for American culture. And apparently, Kid Rock did a great job, and a lot of people that helped the Turning Point halftime show did a great job. And that was a really big cultural victory for America, for American values, for all those things. And it hopefully gets us back to where we need to be in that vein, because the point about the Super Bowl, the point about the halftime show, it's not a shot against Bad Bunny. It's not a shot at, whatever, even though it is a shot against Bad Bunny, because Bad Bunny needs to go away and not do another halftime show ever again. But we need to be an exporter of American culture. This is the biggest cultural event in the world, broadcasted across the entire landscape, the entire world. We need to be an exporter of American culture, American values, not the opposite way around. We do not need to import more world culture. We need to export American culture. We need to lead the dance. We need to show national pride. And we're getting closer to that, I think. We've been getting further and further away from that. I think American pride is kind of making a comeback here. Americanism is making a comeback, which is great. We need to emphasize that in sports. And we need to stop all of this capitulating to everybody else who wants to make American sports what they're not, and instead use them as what they should be, which is a lever and a vantage point into American culture as seen throughout the world. And I think we're getting closer to that, like I said, but could we do a better job? Yes. And we need to do a better job because it's more important than people realize, I think. So LeBron's movie at the end of the day was right. Sports are, quote unquote, more than a game, but just not in the way that it was marketed to us originally. It was not in the way that we thought. And American sports matter a lot. They matter a ton because they are, again, as I've been mentioning throughout this entire show, they are a microcosm of our culture. And they are a biggest reflection of where we're going. They're a reflection of the American populace, of the best of what America has to offer athletically. They're a picture of us. And so the people that minimize sports, the people that say, oh, it's just a bunch of guys that are, throwing a ball on a field or shooting a ball on a hoop, or it's just a bunch of overpaid jocks that are out there and they don't provide any value to society. Like that's not true. That's always been a ridiculous argument. Even the people in sports that say that, like I love Jason Whitlock, but he says that way too much. And should we have people that are honored more than athletes? Of course we should. But, we shouldn't minimize sports, because I think the people that minimize sports are those who truly don't understand what's going on and why sports are important. And the biggest thing, in my view, is we need to reemphasize and retake sports as an American institution in order to bring them back to their rightful place inside of our culture. And I think there's really three big things you need to emphasize with this throughout the entire time that we're going about this process. Sports, the first one being that sports at their best are a fun and a creative way to showcase traditional values. Because, again, going back to the Muscular Christians, I hope this goes viral, if for no reason else than, Muscular Christianity making a comeback. Because sports, if done right, emphasize the best things about America: the American family, masculinity, patriotism, hard work, Christianity. And, the whole Hughes family story with the Olympics, like Jack Hughes getting his teeth knocked out in the middle of the U.S. versus Canada hockey game, scoring the winning goal. Like, that was awesome. Like, that was the best of America. That was the best that we could show people in that time. That was awesome. That was great. It was awesome. And everyone loved it. And all the people that, there was I think a Washington Post article that tried to take a shot at, the hockey team that was really proud of being Americans at the Olympic Games, which is the only point of the Olympics, which is to show cultural dominance for a specific thing. And the American Olympic team did great. We won our most gold medals that we did in, I think, 20 years. We got second place, which is awesome. And so we did really, really great in terms of how we did at the Olympics. And so it got backlash against it because people are like, shut up. They want to be proud of America. So if you don't want to be proud of America, go back and let the people, let these kids have their moment in the sun. Let these kids do all the things they need to do. And so when you elevate people who are doing things in the proper way, you show young people and people around them what it looks like to be an American. A lot of kids probably watched that game and said, I want to be like Jack Hughes. I want to be like those American kids that are on the hockey team, or I want to be like Patrick Mahomes. I want to be like all of these guys that are that are in these awesome sports leagues that are really, really great examples for young people, for young men in particular. So it's the best case to show what a traditional structure looks like: families, masculinity, patriotism, teamwork, excellence, friendship, all of these things. That is the purpose of sports. It's not to win gold medals. It's not to win championships. It's not to make money. It is to make people better people. Period, point blank, full stop. So, second thing, it is an easy way to disciple and bring up young men. Young men need to be trained up in proper fashion, and sports have always been the best way to do this. This is true in my experience. This is true in all of my friends' experience. There has been no guy in particular that I know that have played sports at the highest level that has not benefited from an increase in their masculinity from doing sports, particularly team sports, because team sports are hard. It's hard to be a member of a team and to do things for other people and to sacrifice and to put yourself in a quote-unquote non-advantageous position to advance the goals of the team. And so young men, unlike young women, by the way, this might be a controversial point, but young men do not learn like women do. Because young women learn from primarily being social in the traditional sense and learning in that way. Sit in a classroom, be nice to people, write things down, intellectualize everything. Young men do not learn how to be men that way. They don't. Young men need to be out doing things, earning things, competing with and against other men to hone themselves, to sharpen themselves, to make themselves competitive, viable, better men. Women do not compete that way. Women do not become women through all of those things. And I'm not saying that women can't do sports. I have a cousin that is, I think now the leading, she leads her school in overall assists throughout the history of her school. She's a great athlete. She's probably the best athlete in our family. Certainly better than I was. But as a cultural institution, young men need sports. It is the best way to disciple young men at scale that we have in our culture. because that way they know exactly where to go and what to do in different vectors of life to achieve success. That's true in business. That's true in the church. That's true in families. That's true in dating. Young men learn through doing. Young men learn through getting pushed. Young men learn through adopting responsibility. And the best way to do that is to have them play sports and for sports to be an important vector of American culture. And if we get away from that and we say that just do as women do, be a cog in a machine, whatever, it's not going to work. It hasn't worked, by the way. And that's why sports will always be an important part of American institutions and American culture. It's not just kicking a ball on a field. It's not just throwing a ball or shooting a ball. It's much different than that. It's much more important than that. And thirdly, and I'm not a big believer in this, but I do think that it's important to at least contemplate. So American sports are the best chance we have, in my view, to create cultural cohesion with one another. And so sports are perhaps the most unifying thing we have left in America. They're the most unifying thing we have left to realize in our country. And they always have been that, and they're still that. I don't care what political affiliation you are. I don't care what your race is. I don't care how many kids you have. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. When you're at a sports game, you're at a sports game. You're in the same experience with another person. You are celebrating, rooting for, rooting against something with a lot of other people who you know nothing about. And that's great. And that's awesome. And I've said this multiple times before. I'm not a big fan of the word unity in the way that most people are. Because unity to me means compromise. And I believe there are certain things you should not compromise on. Most certainly values, most certainly American values, most certainly Christian values. We should not compromise those things. We should not, quote unquote, unify with demonic and evil things. Like we can't do that. That's not, I don't think that's just a good way to go about anything. But again, the point of all of this is if we can get people to come back together in third spaces to stitch together the social fabric again, that will be a major win both for citizens themselves and for America at large. Like if we can do that with other Americans, if we can do that with other people, that will be a massive victory for lots of people. And it will bring forth a sense of renewed Americanism, a renewed sense of optimism. Sports are important not because of money or endorsements or athletes themselves or anything like that. They are important because they provide a space for people to unify across shared values. And I don't know another institution that can do that. Maybe food, maybe, but that's about it. Like music is gone, entertainment is gone, movies are gone, government's gone, politics is for sure gone, religion's gone, but sports is really all the cultural, it's the last thing we have to hope for in that way. And if we lose that, then we lose a big piece of who we are as Americans. And I just don't think that if we want to preserve America, if we want to preserve American values, we can let that happen. Sports are not trivial. They're very important. And we need to start seeing them as important again in order to really make that change that we need to make. Thank you all for watching. Own the day, open your mind, and I'll see you guys next week.